Nobody warns you that the daughter you'd give your life for can also be the one who breaks it, slowly, in ways so small, you keep finding reasons to look away. I didn't understand that all at once. It came to me one piece at a time, and I kept explaining each piece away, because I was 63 years old. I'd already buried my wife, and my daughter was the last person left who called me Dad, like it meant something. Her name is Vanessa. And for the 18 months leading up to her wedding, I thought I knew exactly who my daughter had become. But I'm getting ahead of myself. For those of you just joining me, my name is Walter Hollis. I spent 31 years running a family hardware and lumber supply out of Cedar Falls, Iowa, the kind of business my own father started in a converted barn in 1961. I sold it 2 years ago when my knees finally gave out on me. But everybody in 3 counties still calls me Hollis, like it's my whole name. My wife, Dorothy, passed 6 years back. Cancer. Fast. The way it sometimes is. Like it wanted to spare us both a longer goodbye. After she went, it was just me and Vanessa's older brother, Mark, who lives out in Colorado with his own family now. Vanessa was always the one who stayed close. After Dorothy died, she'd drive the 40 minutes from Waterloo every single Sunday, no matter what, and we'd sit on the back porch, and she'd ask me questions about her mother she'd never asked before, like grief had finally made her curious about the things she used to roll her eyes at. I raised her to work hard and speak plain, and never, ever look down on somebody because of what they didn't have. That was Dorothy's rule more than mine, honestly. Dorothy grew up with nothing in a little town outside Dubuque, and she never let either of our kids forget where their comfort came from. So when Vanessa met a man named Preston Doyle at some marketing conference in Chicago and came home lit up in a way I hadn't seen since her mother was alive, I was happy for her, genuinely happy. I don't fall for charm. Easy 30 years selling lumber to contractors teaches you to read a man fast. But Preston shook my hand firm, looked me in the eye, and asked me real questions about the business. Not the polite kind people ask to be polite, but the kind where they actually want the answer. I liked him. Dorothy would have liked him too, I think, though I'll never really know that for certain. And that particular kind of not knowing still catches me some nights. They got engaged after 8 months. Quick, but I wasn't going to say anything some people just know. The wedding got set for the following October, out at a vineyard venue near Galena, and Vanessa threw herself into planning it the way she throws herself into everything, which is to say completely, obsessively, with color swatches and seating charts spread across my kitchen table every other Sunday. Welcome back to Cedar Falls Confessions. If you're new here, pull up a chair, because this one's going to take a while to tell right. Hit that like button, and down in the comments, tell me what part of the country you're watching from tonight. I promise you, this story earns every minute of your time. Here's what I need you to understand about my daughter before anything else. Vanessa is not a cold person. She never was. She's warm and quick, and she laughs loud enough that strangers turn around in restaurants. Same as her mother used to. So when the subject of Preston's family came up, and it came up early because in my family we don't wait around to ask, her answer didn't read to me like a lie. It read like an old wound. My parents and I don't really speak anymore, Preston told me himself. Actually, the second time he came to Sunday dinner. We were out on the porch, just the two of us, and he said it quiet, looking at his hands. It's complicated. They weren't good to me growing up. I had to put some real distance there, for my own sake. I studied him a second. That's a hard thing to carry into a marriage, I said. Empty chairs at a wedding. I know, he said. They won't be there. I need you to be all right with that. I told him I was. And I meant it, because he'd given me no reason not to trust him. And because I'd learned a long time ago that you don't get to know a man's family history by asking twice. What I hadn't accounted for was my late wife's sister, my sister-in-law, Carol, who lives 2 streets over from me and has never in 61 years needed an invitation to speak her mind. It came to a head at Thanksgiving, of all things, with the whole table gathered me, Vanessa, Preston, Mark, and his wife, back from Colorado, Carol, and her husband Ed. Everything was going along fine until Carol, mid-bite of stuffing, set down her fork and looked straight at Preston. Preston, honey, I've got to ask you something, she said. Where are your people? Nobody's mentioned a single aunt, a single cousin. Not one. Preston smiled, but something behind his eyes shifted a half second before the smile landed. My parents and I don't have a relationship, Carol. I mentioned that to Walter. You mentioned it, Carol said. You didn't explain it. Carol, I said, one word, low, the way I used to settle a room full of arguing contractors. Carol picked her fork back up, but the question was already sitting there on the table, same as an empty plate nobody's cleared. Later that night, after everyone left, I found myself standing at my own kitchen sink, a long while, doing nothing, just standing there. Because the thought that kept circling back on me wasn't about Preston at all. It was about myself. What if Preston's parents, wherever they were, whatever had happened, took one look at photographs of me, this broad-shouldered old man, in a flannel shirt, who still smells like cedar sawdust, no matter how many showers he takes, and decided their son was marrying beneath his reach? Preston had grown up, from what little he'd shared, in a world of prep schools and country clubs outside Milwaukee. Vanessa had told me his family had money, old money, the kind that doesn't advertise itself. And here I was, a hardware store owner from Cedar Falls, worried that somewhere out there, a pair of parents I'd never met had already decided I wasn't enough. That fear rode with me the whole drive north the following April, up Highway 151 toward a little town called Platteville, just over the Wisconsin line. I hadn't hired anybody to find them. I didn't need to. Vanessa had asked me back in February to co-sign on a storage unit rental near the venue, since I was listed as the wedding's financial guarantor for vendor deposits. And buried in the paperwork Preston's office manager sent over was his full legal name for the lease, not Preston Doyle, but Preston Michael Dalka. Doyle, it turned out, was his mother's maiden name, the one he'd apparently adopted for himself sometime after college. Out of nothing more than a hardware man's habit of double-checking every signature on a contract, I ran a quick property search on the name Dalka. Took me maybe 15 minutes. Found an address on Birch Street in Platteville, Wisconsin, attached to a Raymond and Susan Dalka. I told Vanessa I had a lumber supplier meeting up near the state line. She barely looked up from her laptop. Told me to drive safe. I got off the highway into Platteville a little before 11 in the morning. Followed the GPS through a neighborhood of small brick ranch houses with chain-link fences and American flags hanging off the porches. The kind of street where every yard's got a garden gnome or a bird bath somebody's proud of. I slowed down at the address. A tidy little house, aluminum siding, a wheelchair ramp built along the side steps, painted the same gray as the shutters, like somebody had taken real care building it to match, rather than just bolting on plywood. This isn't what I pictured. I sat in my truck a full 5 minutes, recalculating everything I thought I knew. There was no fence keeping anybody out, no security gate, nothing suggesting these were people who'd ever spent 1 second wondering if somebody was good enough for them. These were plain, ordinary people. And for one clean, unmistakable moment, I felt something in my chest loosen that I hadn't even known was tight. I got out and walked up that ramp. A man in a Green Bay Packers windbreaker was sitting on the porch in a wheelchair, working a crossword puzzle with a pencil clamped between 2 fingers that didn't look like they closed all the way anymore. He looked up when my boots hit the top step, squinting at me with the careful look of a man used to being cautious about strangers. "Help you with something?" I stopped, took a breath. "Sir, you don't know me. My name's Walter Hollis. My daughter's engaged to your son, Preston." Raymond Dalka's pencil slipped clean out of his fingers and rolled off the porch into the grass. He didn't reach for it. His whole face did something I wasn't ready for. It didn't twist up in anger or suspicion. It broke open, the way a face breaks when relief finally gets somewhere it's been trying to reach for years. "Susan," he said, and his voice cracked wide open on her name. "Susan, come out here." And right then, standing on that porch in Platteville, Wisconsin, watching a retired man in a wheelchair try to gather himself back together, everything I thought I understood about my daughter's fiancé started coming apart at the seams. Inside the Dalka house, everything I believed started unraveling, quiet and steady, over coffee I hadn't asked for, and a plate of butter cookies. Susan sat down with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The house was small and clean and completely full of Preston. School photographs lined up on the wall going back to kindergarten. A varsity letter jacket hanging in a shadow box by the door. A framed picture, on the mantel of a college graduation. Raymond, standing tall behind his wheelchair. No, I realized, looking closer. Raymond was standing in that photo, on his own 2 legs, one arm slung around a much younger Preston, both of them grinning so hard it looked like it hurt. These weren't the faces of people who'd hurt their son. These were the faces of parents who missed him so bad it had carved lines into both of them. The story came out slow, the way real stories do, not the tidy way people tell them when they've rehearsed. Raymond had been a machinist for 34 years at a plant outside Dubuque before his accident, a fall from scaffolding on a side job that put him in that chair permanently, going on 9 years now. Susan had taught 4th grade at the elementary school in town for just as long. They'd put Preston through college on scholarships and their own retirement savings, no debt on his end at all, because that had mattered to them, mattered enormously. Somewhere after college, once Preston moved to Chicago and started climbing at that marketing firm, things had started slipping. Calls got shorter, visits stopped altogether. He started showing up in social media photos under a different last name, moving in circles Raymond and Susan didn't recognize, wearing a version of himself they'd never seen before. Then came the wedding, and with it, a request. $25,000. He said it was for the family contribution, Raymond said, staring hard at his own folded hands. Said Vanessa's family had money and it would look bad if we didn't put something in. We don't have $25,000, Mr. Hollis. We offered him everything we could scrape together. $6,000. Every bit we had that wasn't already spoken for. His answer, Susan said, and her voice had gone flat and careful, the voice of someone holding something together by main force, was that if we couldn't contribute like real family, then maybe we shouldn't come at all. She reached over to a drawer in the side table, pulled out an envelope, and slid it across to me. A birthday card, unopened, stamped, sealed, marked return to sender in red ink across the front. The handwriting on the return address was unmistakably Preston's. I sat there, staring at that red stamp a long time before I finally pulled out my phone. I opened the text Vanessa had sent me 2 nights before, the one I'd read right before falling asleep, the one that had put me on the road north in the first place. Dad, wonderful news, I finally got through to Preston's parents. They apologized for everything and want to have lunch with you before the wedding. So excited for you to finally meet them. I sat there in that kitchen, showing that phone to 2 people who had absolutely no idea their son was, at that very moment, constructing an entirely different set of parents in real time, 3 hours south, in a world they'd never once been welcome inside. That night I didn't say a word to Vanessa. I want that part clear, because it matters. I drove home, sat in my own driveway a good 10 minutes with the engine off, and made myself a promise. Not yet. My own father used to tell me, back when I was learning to negotiate lumber contracts with men twice my age, that the man who reacts first almost never wins. Let the lie finish itself. A half-told lie is just an argument. A whole lie, told all the way to its end, is a confession. Over the next week, I listened different. Vanessa started mentioning a couple named Gerard and Marilyn Preston's aunt and uncle, she called them. Close family friends who'd apparently agreed to step in as his parents since his own were unable to travel. I looked them up quiet, from my own kitchen table. Gerard Whitfield turned out to be a senior partner at a private wealth firm in downtown Chicago, silver-haired, the kind of confidence that comes from 4 decades of never once being questioned in a boardroom. His wife Marilyn sat on 2 hospital foundation boards. Exactly the sort of polished, respectable people you'd want flanking you if you were trying to convince a small-town Iowa family that you came from somewhere impressive. I called Vanessa's uncle, my late wife's brother Frank, who'd become something like a second father to Vanessa after Dorothy passed, and I told him everything. Platteville, the wheelchair ramp, the birthday card sealed in red ink. He listened without a single interruption, and when I finished, he said only 4 words. What do you need? I told him I needed a dinner. A real one, with the right people sitting in the right chairs. Frank owns a supper club outside town, the kind of place with a stone fireplace and elk mounts on the wall, and he told me to leave the room to him. My sister-in-law, Carol, once she heard the whole thing, went so quiet with fury, I almost preferred her yelling. That poor woman, she kept saying, over and over. That poor, poor woman. I drove back to Platteville that Monday, and sat once more at Raymond and Susan's kitchen table. I told them everything Gerard and Marilyn, the performance being built, the dinner I was planning to force the truth into daylight. Susan's hands went still around her coffee mug. Walter, We don't want to cause a scene, she said. Susan, I said, and I looked her dead in the eye. My family is going to stand in a room and welcome whoever walks through that door as Preston's parents. She deserves to know exactly who that is. You've spent 2 years mailing birthday cards that come back unopened. You deserve to be in that room. Raymond wheeled himself forward and took his wife's hand. He looked up at me. What time should we be there? Frank had the whole dinner arranged inside a week. My brother-in-law, Ed, wanted to say something to Preston at the door on his way in. I had to talk him down from that personally, told him I needed him quiet until I stood up to give the toast. Not one word before. He grumbled, but he agreed, so long as he got to hold the door on the way out. The dinner was set for a Saturday evening in late September. Raymond and Susan drove down that morning and checked into a motel outside Cedar Falls. Raymond called me the night before to confirm, and near the end of the call he went quiet a second, then said, "Lo, Walter, whatever happens tomorrow in that room, thank you for driving up to Platteville, for knocking on that door." A pause. You raised a good woman. She just doesn't know it yet. I didn't know what to say back to that, so I just told him I'd see him tomorrow. The night before, lying in bed, I thought about a man in a wheelchair working a crossword puzzle on his porch. A birthday card stamped and returned. Two people who had been waiting 2 years for somebody to finally show up. Somebody was showing up tomorrow. They both were. That Saturday morning I woke with a stillness in my chest that didn't come from calm, it came from certainty. Vanessa called around 10 to remind me about the dinner, her voice bright and easy, completely unaware of anything waiting for her. Frank's supper club filled up warm that evening. Low light, white tablecloths, a fire going even though it wasn't cold enough to need it. My family arrived early. Frank, Carol, Ed, Mark, flying in special from Colorado with his wife. I stood near the bar in my one good sport coat and watched the room fill in. Vanessa arrived at 7, laughing before she even cleared the doorway, on Preston's arm. Behind them came Gerard and Marilyn Whitfield, silver and polished and perfectly composed. Introductions went around. Firm handshakes. "I've heard so much about you both," I told the Whitfields, which was, strictly speaking, entirely true. I just hadn't heard it from where they thought I had. We sat. Food came. Roast, potatoes, the kind of meal Dorothy would have approved of. Gerard asked me thoughtful questions about the hardware business. Marilyn complimented Carol on the venue. Vanessa glowed the whole meal through, radiant, victorious, certain she'd finally cleared the last hurdle standing between her and the wedding she wanted. At 7:50, in the lull between the entree and dessert, I stood and tapped my fork against my glass. The table quieted. Vanessa looked up at me with that same bright, expectant smile, waiting for a toast about how much I loved her. "I want to thank everybody for being here tonight," I said, keeping my voice even, unhurried. "In this family, a dinner like this isn't just a nice evening. It's a statement. It says these people are real. These people matter to us. We don't say that lightly." I let my eyes move slow around the table. "So tonight, I want to make sure we've actually got the right people sitting at this table." I nodded toward the side door, where Frank was waiting. He opened it. Raymond Dalka wheeled himself through first, in a pressed shirt that hung a little looser on him than it once had. Susan walked beside him in a plain blue dress, her chin held high, moving with the careful dignity of a woman who had decided, whatever happened next, she would not fall apart in front of strangers. Vanessa saw them. I'd made sure I was watching her face when she did. The color drained out of it fast, complete, like a tide pulling back all at once. Her wine glass tipped in her hand. I reached over without looking and steadied it. "Dad," she said, and her voice came out thin, barely there. "I drove up to Platteville," I said, quiet. Not for the room, just for her. 3 weeks ago, I found a man watering no, working a crossword on his porch in a Packers jacket, and when I told him my name, he dropped his pencil clean off the porch. The room had gone completely silent. "Vanessa, your father-in-law spent 34 years as a machinist before an accident put him in that chair. Your mother-in-law taught 4th grade for just as long. They put Preston through college without $1 of debt because they wanted him to have every chance. They offered $25,000. That was too much, so they offered what they had, $6,000. And they were told that wasn't enough to count as family. Preston hadn't moved. His jaw had gone tight, his face gray. I held the birthday card your mother-in-law mailed to her son, I went on. Stamped return to sender. And while I sat in that kitchen, I got a text from you telling me his parents had apologized and wanted to meet me for lunch. I turned to Gerard and Marilyn. Marilyn's hands were flat on the table in front of her, her face gone completely pale. I know exactly what you were told, I said. That his real parents had passed years ago. That you were asked to stand in, out of kindness, so he wouldn't have to face a small-town wedding without family in the room. I gestured toward Raymond and Susan. These are his real parents. They're sitting right there. Marilyn looked at Preston. A long look, the kind that doesn't need words, because words wouldn't be enough anyway. Then she looked at Raymond and Susan, and something crossed her face that was worse than anger. It was recognition, the specific recognition of a person realizing the man she thought she knew doesn't exist. Gerard didn't say a word. He folded his napkin, set it beside his plate, and stood, the gesture of a man who'd decided there was nothing left worth saying. I turned back to Vanessa one last time. She'd stopped looking for an exit. There wasn't one, and she knew it. I watched your mother spend 28 years treating everybody like they mattered, I said. The men who worked the lumber yard, the woman who cleaned my store every night, a retired machinist in Platteville who gave everything he had and got told it wasn't enough. I reached into my jacket pocket. That's the measuring stick I was raised by, and it's the one I raised you by. By that measure, sweetheart, I don't know who you are right now. I set the small gift box I'd carried in my pocket down on the white tablecloth in front of her, not the ring itself, that was hers to keep or return as she chose, but the toast gift I'd planned to give her that night, a bracelet that had been her mother's. I set it down gently, not thrown, not dramatic, just placed the way you set something down after you've carried it too long and you're finally ready to let it go. Then I picked up the small bouquet from the center of our table, white flowers, simple, Carol's choice, and crossed the room to where Susan Dalka stood. She was fighting to hold herself together. I could see it in her jaw, her shoulders, the careful, shallow way she was breathing. I held the flowers out to her. She looked at them, looked at me, and broke completely. It wasn't loud. It was the quiet kind. The kind that comes after 2 years of carrying something and finally finding somewhere safe to set it down. Raymond had his arm around her before the first sound even left her. He looked up at me over his wife's shoulder. Then, he did something I hadn't expected. He reached his free hand toward me. I took it. He held on hard, the grip of a man saying something his voice still couldn't manage. Frank stepped up beside me. He looked at Raymond a moment, then extended his own hand. I'm Frank, he said. I should have met you both a long time ago. I'm sorry it took this. Raymond shook his hand, swallowed once. Raymond, he managed, thank you for raising people like this. Carol didn't shake Susan's hand. She pulled her into a full embrace, both arms, immediate and unconditional, the way certain women hold on to whoever needs holding. We walked out together, Raymond wheeling himself with Susan's hand resting on his shoulder, Frank and Ed close behind. Ed held the door, same as he'd promised. He paused there just once, looked back at the room, then let it swing shut behind him. Outside, in the cool September air, I stood beside Frank and breathed for what felt like the first time all night. Dorothy would have done exactly this, Frank said. That was all he said. Across the parking lot, Raymond looked out at the lights of downtown, Susan tucked against him, the white flowers still in her hands. 2 people who'd just gotten back, something they'd stopped believing they'd ever see again. Raymond caught me watching. He nodded once, not thanks, exactly, more like something there wasn't a word for. I nodded back. Some deals you close for profit. Some you close because there's no version of yourself you can live with if you walk away from the table. That Saturday night, I closed the most important deal of my life, and I didn't make a dime off it. Some people build a whole life on top of the family they've decided to forget. My daughter built hers on top of a birthday card sealed in red ink and a father who never once stopped waiting by the mailbox. And on a Saturday night in September, in a supper club outside Cedar Falls, Iowa, every floor of it came down at once. If this story meant something to you tonight, hit that like button, subscribe, and let me know down in the comments where you're watching from. I'll see you next time.